Hello, this is Eric Morse Eskenazi. I'm the host of the Iraq Dispatches podcast. Thanks for tuning into this latest episode featuring an interview with Ivan Funkboy Bodley, author of Am I Famous Yet? Memoir of a Working Class Rock Star. Ivan has performed in some of the biggest music venues in the world with some of the most famous musicians and bands, and he's also performed in some of the most modest venues as well. I'm sure everyone will find this interview extremely entertaining and fascinating. Hello, thanks for listening to the Erratic Dispatches podcast. We'll be back shortly after a brief break. Hello, I've been using Anchor.fm now for about almost a year for the podcast Erratic Dispatches, which is distributed through Anchor.fm. It's completely free to use, very easy, and any audio that you upload or record through the website, it will be you can use it to organize your audio files, and once your podcasts are ready to submit, it will be available to stream within at least 8 different streaming sites. So, Ivan, do you mind just talking a little bit about you're originally from Tennessee?
Grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, home of the choo-choo, home of the place where they invented the tow truck, home of the first Coca-Cola bottling company, home of Bessie Smith, the blues singer, and the Impressions, the soul singers. And presently notable for having the fastest internet in the northern hemisphere, I think, for some reason.
Wow.
It's an odd relationship I have with that town. I grew up there. When I grew up there, it was one of the top 10 most polluted cities in America because of all the industry now, and now it's one of the top 10 most desirable places to live in the country on people who make lists of places like that. So when I go back, I don't recognize it, and I have some friends who are not from there who actually moved there and live there by choice now. It's a great town that I just don't recognize. It's really funny.
Do you have any family members still down there?
I've got a half-sister or husband and a nephew, and I've got my parents are gone, and my brother is out in Colorado with his wife and kids.
Was there anything about growing up in Tennessee that you believe had inspired you to either become a musician or inspired your own music?
That's so interesting. I was so unaware of what the local music scene was in Chattanooga. There was some, like I said, the Impressions were from there. It's like some rich history that was there that I was just sort of oblivious to. It kind of felt like a standard sort of suburban town that you listened to the pop radio, and that was sort of your connection to the outside world. And curiously enough, my boys' preparatory high school had no music program. Right. So I had no initial training like most people do. Like you play in marching band or something, you learn how to read something, play a trombone, anything, right? I had none of that. So I really, it was almost the lack of my awareness of music because of Chattanooga that sort of inspired me to kind of pick it up on my own and learn it on my own. So maybe it was a good thing that I didn't have that much of a route into the local scene there.
And do you mind talking about what initially inspired you to start picking up, the bass guitar? And there were any particular bass guitarists that you really, admired, or that really I love the sound that they create. Like I want to sort of emulate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a theory that your instrument chooses you rather than you choose your instrument, because I think certain instruments fit different kind of personality profiles in terms of what their function is in the band, so like the bass player is a sort of a rhythmic and supportive role. You're not sort of at the front of the stage with one finger in the air, grandstanding most of the night. I mean, you might occasionally get a chance to do that. So you kind of have to have the personality to sort of be in a team player, supportive player kind of role. I certainly dabbled as a kid. I dabbled with piano for a little bit. I dabbled with guitar for a hot second, and viola for even half a second, I think. But none of those really stuck until I was a senior in high school before I even picked up a bass. And I'd seen a couple of things that really sort of got me on the path. I saw Mother's Finest play. They were opening for the Atlanta Rhythm section, and their bass player, Wizard, was just a phenom. He was just unbelievable. This funk rock hybrid that they were doing sounded like Parliament Funkadelic meets Led Zeppelin. It was just the heaviest, most influential thing I've ever seen. And I wasn't playing at that time, but I remember looking at that band and thinking, like, whatever that is, I want to do that. I'm not sure what that is. And in recent years, I've actually been able to work with Moses Moe, the guitar player from Mother's Finest. We've been recording, long distance. I've been sending him files up and down. So he's like one of my childhood heroes that I've actually gotten to work with as an adult, which was kind of cool. And then there's some other things like I remember specifically seeing Rick James on the Midnight Special. This is pre-MTV, so the only time you got to see live music was kind of on Saturday Night Live or the Midnight Special or Don Kirshner's rock concert, or maybe if they would do a guest spot on Carson or something like that. There were kind of limited places to see live music. And I remember, I listened to a lot of R&B radio in Chattanooga. I remember that, and I knew Rick James. I knew who he was, but I saw him play the song You and I live. And it has this sort of four-note repetitive bass line, down, 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 and it just repeats for most of the song. And there was a guy who lived in the dorm at my school. Like, some of us were day students, some of us were dorm students, and he had a bass that I don't know if he'd made it or if he inherited it, but it only had two strings on it. It only had an E string and an A string, the low notes, the money notes, the ones we get paid for, right? And I remember sitting in his room and being able to pick out that bass line on my own on the bass and play it in a way that I was like, oh, this is cool, man. I know this is cool. So that kind of set me on the path to sort of like, figure out that I wanted to try and, take lessons and see if that was going to work. And my bass teacher sold me his first bass, which is a Fender Precision bass, a 1978 blonde Fender P bass, which I still have. I still have it to this day. And yeah, I started there and not having any idea where it would take me, and having no aspirations to have it as necessarily a career. Because when you're graduating high school, you're ready to go off to college and study something and have a career. And I was nowhere near ready to go to music school. I had no training, I had nothing. So it took me until graduating college. I went as a biomedical engineering student, and I ended up graduating with a psychology degree, but I really majored in college radio. And then I went to work for the music business. I went to work as a publicist for Epic Records. And I did that for 3 years and realized that the music business has very little to do with music per se. So I ended up quitting that, and then through a period of self-discovery, went back and got a music degree, I think when I was 26. That's when I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston.
And then in your book, I remember you were mentioning about how, when you were a kid or a teenager, you felt like a loner, kind of a misfit. But I guess like once you started playing music, you were sort of like joining a crowd of like-minded people, where you felt accepted and you could express yourself,
It certainly felt that way. I mean, like I said, it was a sort of a prestigious preparatory school, and I was kind of like the poor townie who was allowed to go to school. So it was an all boys school, all white, all male, all Christian, and I just didn't fit. I was like a Jewish kid from big, tall, goofy looking, whatever, and I wasn't athletic particularly, or I didn't like team sports. So I was like, I got into the theater program, and I was like doing all the plays and stuff like that. So it wasn't until senior year, there's a talent show that they had every year in the spring. And that was the first time I played in front of people with, and suddenly there were five other guys that wanted to play guitars and drums, and suddenly we could be pals. And then there was a gymnasium full of kids screaming in approval at what we were doing. And I was like, well, that's a sudden change of fortune, which I said, and I think I even talked about it in the book. Like that's kind of set me sort of on the path of figuring how can I recapture that going forward as a way to be accepted by people, and I think that's what happened.
And like the stories you're talking about, like when you started getting into college radio, how you would try to get like free records, from places.
The whole thing was started because of trying to get free records. I found my aunt had a friend. My mother's family's from New York City, so I used to come and visit New York City about once a year as a kid growing up, which is why I think I chose to live here now. But my aunt's one of her friends was a publicist, I think for I want to say Atlantic or Warner Brothers Records, maybe. So I remember when I was about 15, I went to go visit, and she took me to her friend's house, and she had stacks and stacks of vinyl, like covering like 3 walls of the apartment. I'm like, what the heck is going on? These things cost at least $6.99 at the record bar. Like, how could you possibly afford to decorate your entire house? And she explained to me what the promos were and how they gave each other these things as courtesy. And she gave me like a dozen, 15 records, that she had duplicate copies of to take home. And it was, at the time, it was sort of like new wave stuff. So it was like Devo and Elvis Costello and Blondie and things like that. And it just Patti Smith, Horses, that was in one of the records, really turned my head around. And so then I spent the rest of my life until now basically trying to find free records somewhere. And I still do it. I still bootleg stuff and download. I have a couple of websites that I visit pretty much every day to see, like, oh, what Blue Note recording am I missing from Rudy Van Gelder's studio in 1959? Today I got the Coltrane's Ballads album, and I don't know why I didn't have a copy of it, but I do now. And it's all because of those 15 free records I got when I was a teenager.
So back then, like in the pre-internet days, I guess most of the bands you would find out from, I guess a lot of it would be through getting free promos, or were there any like interesting record stores near the college that had a good eclectic selection of stuff that you took?
Yeah. That was sort of in 2 phases. So I started my free record collection quest when I was in Chattanooga. And when I was when you go to the commercial FM station, they're going to play. At the time, it was like Journey and Loverboy and, whatever. Those were the records. So the records they were giving away were the things that the record label thought, like, maybe Elvis Costello might cross over into a pop sort of hit. So they would give that crap away. They didn't want that. So they gave that to me. And I'm like, well, this is a gold mine here, And then you could read about things in, Rolling Stone or Cream Magazine or stuff like that. But when I got to Tulane, when I started working at the campus station immediately, again, to try to find free records, I ended up becoming the music director within the first year. I think maybe February of the spring semester or something. I got, because somebody left, and I got sort of thrown as a replacement. So then I was suddenly reading the trades every week. Like, I had the finger on all the alternative stuff that was coming in. I also worked in the exact record store that you're talking about. It was called Mushroom Records and Tapes, and it was on Broadway and Ferret in New Orleans. And I was working retail and dealing with that and seeing who was coming through town and dealing with promoting things on the radio stations. I suddenly got extremely plugged in, which has been very valuable for my musical knowledge and acumen.
Were you reading like any of the music trades from England, like NME and and stuff like that, to find about other bands?
A little bit. I mean, there was so much of information available in those days. Like, the college radio trades were the CMJ Music Journal. There was a thing called the Gavin Report. That was a big radio trade. I can't remember. Rock Pool was another one. So the things. It would be one thing to sort of read NME or sounds and know about things from England, but then it would be another thing to try to get the records as an import. So I had some friends who were doing that, who were like really they had the Kaja Gugu record, a year before anybody else did, kind of thing. But I was kind of, I was a little more domestic in my applications, because I wasn't willing to go buy the import. I was waiting until an American company was going to send me a free promo of it.
Right, yeah.
So I knew about the bands, but then I might hear them a little later, So.
With your collection of different electric basses that you play, I know you have different brands like Fender and Gretsch and that sort of thing. Do you have any favorites in regards to brands, or is it in regards to your favorite brands, does it depend on the type of wood that's used or the type of strings that they use, or
all of that, and it depends on the gig that you're doing. Like, I have a friend of mine who's got a company out in New Jersey called Moxie Guitars, who will build anything you could possibly imagine. He built me these 2 glitter Explorer body, just beautiful. They look like set pieces. But the guts of them are basically a Fender P bass. And sort of in my career, I think when I set out, you were talking about bassists that sort of inspired me getting started. You start listening to, at the time, like Stanley Clarke and Jaco Pastorius. And I was like, well, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a big fusion jazz hero. And looking in the rearview mirror now, I realize, well, none of that happened. Not one thing. And most of my bread and butter got made by playing with classic soul artists, like a lot of Stax, a lot of Motown. So those, and when I was in New Orleans too, like, like watching the Meters play, George Porter Jr., like those are all P bass gigs, P bass, Fender P bass, Fender P bass. So the P bass is sort of my main go-to for most things, and then the Gretsch is a beautiful hollow body thing when you need that sort of thing, short scale, kind of thuddy, weird. I've got an 8-string alembic I'm looking at up here on the wall. So if you need like this big John Entwistle wall of noise, you can pull that thing out, or a fretless thing if you're trying to get a jockey kind of sound. So it just depends on the gig, basically.
Do you ever incorporate like effects pedals when you play live?
I do. Lately, I've been using a thing from Tech 21 called the Bass Fly Rig. It's about a foot long and about 4 inches wide, and it's the most genius piece of compact gear I've ever seen. It's got a Sans amp simulator in it. It's got a direct out, so it can go straight to the front of house console. So no matter what's happening with whatever rented amp you're using on stage, you've got this beautiful like Ampeg B15 type of sound going out to the front of house and coming through the monitors. It's got it's got a beautiful chorus. It's got an envelope filter. It's got a fuzz. It's got a octave divider. It's got a boost. It's got all this kind of crazy stuff in it. This tiny little pedal, which is just like, revolutionized, because I've spent years and years just doing a bass and a wire. That was all, and this thing, like, especially now, if you're doing anything that, like I'll be playing a wedding gig this Saturday. So we're going to, do Uptown Funk by Bruno Mars. So you just click on the octave divider and the envelope filter, and suddenly you're like, you have this big, synthy sounding thing, which makes everybody turn around and go, that's you? Wow. Okay, cool.
When you play live, like depending on the type of music or venue it is, like what's like the normal like decibel level that you play?
I can't say a normal because it varies so wildly. Like, even this weekend I'll be starting to do a cocktail duo, and then by the end of the night it's going to be like a 10-piece monstrosity, just full out. So it's going to go from a whisper to a scream within the same gig. I do play a lot of gigs that are at volume, and I certainly advocate foam earplug hearing protection for everyone. But I've managed to escape to this point in my advancing years with most of my hearing intact. So
that's great.
That's a win, I think.
Do you like wear like when you play live? Do you like wear like like stuff in your ears so your hearing isn't impacted, or you're not getting tinnitus?
I've got you get a little bit of what we call the tinnitus, just from living to be a certain age. But I always use the compression foam earplugs. I have them; they're on my keychain. They go with me everywhere. I buy them, in bulk, and I plug up for almost everything. That's kind of just the way I always learned to play. I know some people complain about it, especially singers, like, I can't hear myself. But actually, when I sing, I can hear myself better because you kind of hear yourself internally by blocking out some of the ambient. But again, I've acclimated to it my whole life. So for me, that's the most comfortable way to play.
I really enjoyed the stories where like you're basically, like things could change at the last minute. And then sometimes like you have to learn songs like such a short advance notice. I found that really fascinating. And I guess you basically, when you're playing live, like anything could happen. I'm sure there's been things that are like pandemonium could happen, or do people ever jump on the stage like they're intoxicated and whatever, like just things like that could happen, or
I know all the time. It happens constantly. Especially if you're playing bars at doing dance sets at night. I played a gig last Saturday, another wedding. It was out in the Hamptons, and as soon as we rolled up to the place, the father of the bride comes running out and is like, "Do you guys know Wild Horses?" I'm like, "Yeah, I actually do." You could have let me know ahead of time. We would have made sure the whole band knew it, but I actually had a chart with my iPad, and I was able to airdrop it around the band. So we, made them look like heroes when they were performing at their own wedding, and then they did so well. They wanted the I think it was the sister of the bride to do like an encore. She's like, we didn't even plan the show, much less the encore. So she turns around to me and says, "Do you know me and Bobby McGee?" And again, I do, but the keyboard player bailed out. She's like, she didn't know it. The drummer knew it. The guitar player didn't know it. So I had to like call the chords out to the guitar player. The whole, as we're playing the song, I'm like, G, 5, D, like to walk him through the entire thing to save the night. And of course, we came out looking like heroes. But it's just you just never know what curveballs they're gonna throw at you.
I found it really crazy when you talk about your experience where like you get invited to play a gig and like they make all the musicians kind of like enter like in the back.
Yeah.
It's like it's kind of very disrespectful, and it's just like I just wish you guys were treated more respectfully.
Last weekend we had they had staff meals for us, or vendor meals, whatever it was. It was like a nice breaded chicken or something, which I don't even eat because I'm a vegetarian or whatever. But they could not. We were at some people's like set up in their house, they're in the grounds of their house. They could not or would not find a fork for any of the band members to eat. Like the band had to eat with their hands. Like there were no utensils available, and they weren't. I was like, well, I guess we know where we rate on the on the scale of importance for the night.
So like the beginning of the shutdown last year, like I guess you weren't doing much gigs, and I guess were you doing any stuff like online, any virtual concerts?
The stuff I was doing online, I managed to keep busy doing a lot of stuff. Most of it was recording remotely with my friends. It's like 'cause we were all in the same boat. Like everybody's sitting at home, like we had nothing to do, no gigs, no nothing. So I managed to get a lot of my friends who I wouldn't ordinarily been able to find, and we just did this file sharing thing, and we were passing around. I have some songs that I completed about 25 different tracks, I think, and ended up getting signed to Color Red Records as a result of it. So
that's
they
great.
actually released a single that was recorded during the quarantine.
Wow.
They've got a bunch of stuff more coming behind that one because I got this whole backlog of stuff. And then I had a bunch of tracks that I did with a recording project trio I had. It was going back about 10 years ago. Okay. And they were just sitting in the can. They were never mixed, never mastered, never released. So one of my quarantine projects was teaching myself how to be an audio engineer to mix my own stuff. So I have all that, a whole, I have two things, the quarantine sessions, and then I have music from the vaults, that whole series. I've been like putting out a video every week or so for the entire time, that we've been locked down.
I saw some of your videos on YouTube. I like the one where, did you shoot any of that footage? One where it's like kind of approaching underneath an underpass, like a bridge, where there's like a lot of graffiti around?
Yeah. I just did it on my phone.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah, it's all right here. Everything's right there.
Oh, great. Was that shot? Where was that shot at? That I was wondering what that bridge or the graffiti was. That in Brooklyn?
No, I'm in Queens, so that's in a place called Forest Park.
Park. Okay.
There is an abandoned railway bed that runs through the park that they're petitioning now. Some friends of mine are actually working on it. They want to call it the. I'm going to get this wrong. I think it's called the Greenway.
It's like a High Line, like in Manhattan, right? They're going to
very much
like that.
Yes. So they're petitioning. So right now, like people use it. They go down there and they hang out, kind of thing. But they want to like formalize it and make it some nice, walking paths and all that kind of stuff. So down under there, I've been there a couple of times, like on volunteer trash cleanup duty. Just to go down there, and we pulled out tons and tons of stuff. People throw off the bridges or whatever. And there's this beautiful graffiti down there because it's not well trafficked, So I went down there and I was like, all right, well, I'm shooting this because, I need some footage. And it's so gorgeous. I mean, the artwork is amazing down there.
And right now you're based up in Forest Hills?
Yes.
Where the Ramones are from.
Correct. Yeah. We're on the bad side of the tracks, because the Forest Hills guards are pretty ritzy, but we're on the Ramones side of the tracks over here. Yeah.
It's an interesting neighborhood. I like it. I've been up there in Briarwood too. That's kind of, I guess it's nearby. Yeah.
Yeah. We're about 10 blocks from Rock and Roll High School.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So in regards to like engineering, do you use like any particular software, like doing home engineering? Like do you use Pro Tools or?
I in the past I have used Pro Tools and I taught myself how to use it, but I didn't keep updating it because there's constantly upgrading. It kept costing you money. I'm just like, I don't need all of the features that it had. So I managed to get a baby version of Reason.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it's like Reason Essentials. It's the one that costs, I don't know, $100, $120 or something. And it has everything I could possibly need in it. Like I'm not sequencing tremendous amounts of music, and I'm not like side chaining
Mm-hmm.
compressors to kick
Mm-hmm.
drums and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Although that said, I can do that in Reason the way it is, like
Mm-hmm.
without even buying the full version. But yeah, I've been able to do it, just with the baby version, and it's
Mm-hmm.
comparable to Logic and things like that.
Do you ever do like any recording with your bass like hooked up to an iPad and like use different apps with it?
Um, I haven't recorded into the iPad yet, but there was an app that I had. This is the last iPad, not on the newest one. I can't remember. It was called Amplitude,
Oh yeah. Okay.
and it was an amp simulator. So I had the
Mm-hmm.
little iRig thing, so you could plug it in, plug the bass in and plug headphones in. But what I was using that for was to practice material when I was on the road.
Mm-hmm.
When I had to sort of like, when I was having to learn material and I was also traveling at the same time. So I hadn't tried recording on the iPad, but I'm sure I could figure that out these days if I had to.
Mm-hmm. So since things are kind of picking up now, like you're doing like different like, are you doing any tours? I guess coming up like later this year or next year?
Well, June 5th started like the private party work just
Mm-hmm.
came back with a vengeance. So I'm booked every Saturday between here and October already,
Mm-hmm.
doing private party work.
Mm-hmm.
So the Broadway stuff, which I tend to sub on now and again, is coming back starting September, October, thereabouts.
Mm-hmm.
And all those shows are going to have to restart with their regular players first. So the subs are going to be, October, November, December, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. There's a couple of tours that have been talked about. Most of the concert stuff is kind of slow coming back. There are a couple of acts that are out that sort of jumped on it because they knew they had the opening to go do it. But I think most of the touring stuff is going to be next year, if I had to guess.
Mm-hmm.
For me anyway. I could be wrong about that. By the fall, there's like a Motown Christmas show that I've been doing for the last couple of
Wow.
years, which may very well make it back in time for this winter, but hard to say.
When was the last time you were able to play outside the U.S.?
Uh, Let me think about this. I haven't been outside the U.S. since quarantine shut down. I have a private party scheduled
Mm-hmm.
for in Tuscany in the middle
Mm-hmm.
of April.
Hmm.
April. What am I saying? August. So that's a distinct possibility that'll get me out of town soon. What was the last international thing I did? I don't know. Like I feel like in the quarantine I just lost a year and a half. Like my sense of time is completely mush now. Um, I can't even remember the last overseas gig I did. Um, if I think of it, I'll chime it in, but I don't even know.
Hello, thanks for listening to the Erratic Dispatches podcast. We'll be back shortly after a brief break. So yeah, do you mind talking about, Ivan, like what inspired you to start writing your book?
Oh yeah, sure. Um, I I have like just a ton of road stories, gig stories, So like
Mm-hmm.
anytime we're sitting around backstage, between sound check and the show, there's always time to kill, and somebody will invariably say, "Hey man, did you see blah blah that just happened?" And I'm just like, "Yeah, I saw that, but you should check this out." Like remember, because I always have a story that is probably more colorful than the one whatever we just saw. I've probably got one that's even weirder to go. So I would just tell these stories like, oh, that reminds me of the time that such and such happened. And I would do that so frequently that people were saying like, you should really write this stuff down. And I started to about, I guess it's been 4 or 5 years ago, really. And I got a bunch of it, a bulk of it written sort of during a winter because winter times are pretty slow. Usually the tours are going out in the summer. So I got most of it done and then kind of wasn't finishing it. It wasn't following up. And it really took like, that was another quarantine project. Like, okay, now you have the time and it's time to finish this thing and see if you can actually, get it put out and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the path of it. So, and here we are. I have a book out. I never thought I would actually get that done, but I do.
And how has the public reaction been so far?
It's just been just been lovely. I mean, I've really thrilled with all the people who have picked it up. The feedback has been nothing but glowing, and I'm sure that's because people don't want to offend me to my face, but I have a lot of people, friends of mine, who's like, I'm not a big reader, but I was actually able to sort of digest this because the chapters are kind of short. They're kind of piecemeal, so you can kind of like do it a chunk at a time without feeling like you're sitting down to read War and Peace in one go kind of thing. So it's just been lovely. I've sold way more copies than I ever thought I would, and I've had more positive, sweet, really nice feedback than I ever thought I would get for it too. So I'm waiting for the trolls. I'm sure they'll show up eventually, But
And how long did you work on a book for?
Well, I said I got most of it done probably within a couple of months or so, like when I was having a slow winter, and then during the quarantine, when I was doing all the polishing, that was it was like stop and start. Like, my aunt is a used to be a copy editor with Time magazine. So she went through that process. So like, I wouldn't see it for a month and I'd come back and start to put in all the revisions and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, it took 5 years, but it really didn't take 5 years. It took 5 years it probably took 3 months of, direct attention, I would imagine, to get the thing done, if I had to guess.
And have you ever on the side done bass guitar lessons or private lessons to young musicians?
Yeah. No, I teach. I don't recruit people, but when they seek me out, that's the kind of lesson I like. Because when people that seek out lessons, those are people who have questions, and if they have questions, I can give them certain answers based on my experience. Like I know what I've discovered that pertains to the questions that they're asking. So if they're self-motivated and inquisitive and questioning, I'm all about it. I take, and again, because of the lockdown now, we've been doing things via Zoom and Skype and everything else in ways, whereas never before you used to feel like you really needed to see somebody face to face. Now, kind of not so much, you can kind of do it anywhere now.
And, when you're playing live, has there been any particular concerts that you played where you felt like the crowd was just so in sync with everybody, when you guys are playing?
Yeah, I mean, I feel lucky that that's happened a whole bunch in my career. It's in different, and not even even in the same band and the same tour, there's only going to be 2 nights which are killing, and everybody's sort of on the same page. But it happens enough, with Sam Moore, who's from Sam and Dave. I was his music director for 13 years on the road before he kind of officially retired. And sometimes, there was a jazz festival we played in Tokyo that was just off the charts great. It was live on television, 5,000 of our closest fans. The Japanese are usually very reserved, kind of, not emotive sort of people as a culture, if I had to generalize. And they were just screaming, all but standing on the back of their chairs, which is very unusual for a Japanese crowd. But it was just it couldn't have been a better night. I think we had a 12 or 14 piece band. Everybody was in sync. Everybody was firing on all cylinders, just tremendous. But that's not every day,
Yeah. Do you ever do session work for film or television or video games?
100%.
Yeah.
I'll play whatever you want.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of it's been remote lately. So I've done recording sessions for people, all over the place. I don't think any of my stuff has actually made it to a video game that I know of. But from my end, it's the same technology. I'm recording a WAV file using a Fender bass. So, what happens to it is up to the end user. But I definitely had things that have been in film soundtracks and stuff like that. So, yeah, sure.
Oh, that's great. Have there been any times where you play live where some of your co-musicians may not be sober, and it's sort of you have to sort of feel like you have to cover their back, to make them look good, or how's that usually happen?
That's happened. It's happened, hopefully not too often. I think once you get to a certain level of professionalism, most people know that they're here to do a job and they're being paid to do a job. So they tend to know that they have to at least hit their marks. So most of my friends are what I would call functional alcoholics. You know, they know they know how to make the gig happen. But occasionally, those people can go off script a little bit, and you kind of, you can find yourself picking up some slack once in a while if somebody may have been overserved here or there. It's the exception, but it's certainly in the rock and roll world. Things happen. It's happened.
What do you find to be the biggest joys and challenges of being a musician?
Oh man, I think this may apply to sort of anybody in the performing arts. There's so much rejection involved. Everybody wants to be in the quote unquote glamour professions. So there's a whole line of people waiting out the door who are ready to do your job, and do it for less money than you're willing to do it. They may or may not be competent, but they're willing, and if the person who's hiring you doesn't understand what the value of your competency is, they may indeed toss you over for somebody who's going to do the job for less money, So, and then there are just things that, for whatever reason, you want this job or you want that job, or you're going for this audition or that audition, and you just don't make it, because there's so many factors involved beyond just what your skill set might be for a given thing. There's the vibe. There's how do you get along with the people in the band, kind of thing. And there have been situations where I say this all the time. I say I've been the guy who's been fired from a band, and I've been the guy who's been hired to replace the guy who's been fired, almost in equal measures. Like, it's such a fickle business in a way. So you have to have a really thick skin, and you have to sort of know who you are and what your value is. To deal with that, I think, so that can be one of the big frustrations about it. But again, when, as we were talking earlier, when things go right, they go really right, and the feeling is spectacular. So it feels kind of worth it in the end. That said, if anybody asks me, like, how do you get into the performing arts, I tell them, listen, if you can do anything else, do that. Because there's so much heartache you have to put up with, and there's so much eating of crap that you have to put up with, that it takes a special kind of person to be dedicated to being able to weather that for decades. Literally decades. I still get it to this day.
What kind of elements of the music business do you feel has changed since you first started it?
Well, that's really interesting. The big thing that's changed is the record companies, because when I was first coming up, everything was on vinyl, it was an LP or a 45, and the record companies just ran the whole industry. They owned the copyright, they owned the means of production, they owned the format, so like they really, there was nothing you could do, seemingly, without a record label sort of behind you to allow your stuff to get out to market. Unless you're willing to physically go print up 100 copies of your 45 and physically take them around. It took quite a machine to get anything past the gatekeepers. And now, it's so egalitarian that anybody can be on YouTube tonight. You can have potential worldwide distribution tonight, which is a revolutionary change, but it also means everybody else also has the same access too. So how do you rise up through the mass of people who have this tool available to them? And that's a huge change. Huge, just like a sea change in the whole culture of the industry,
Yeah, and I hope that things will get better for independent musicians where they can get more money, because a lot of people are being shortchanged by streaming. It's like getting less than a penny per song. It's insane.
It's not good. It's not good.
Yeah.
But that said, the initial artist contract that you would sign when you were, let's say you got a record deal in the 80s or something. You would sign a record deal that says your royalty rate was 6%, which means 94% of the money went to the record company before you got your 6%. And out of your 6%, there were things that they called recoupable costs. So the cost of recording, all the studio costs,
Mm-hmm.
all the cost of making videos, all those promotion costs came out of your 6%, not the record company's 94%. So you basically had to sell 1 million records before you would
Mm-hmm.
start to see a profit from the companies at all, because there's all this sort of creative accounting that went on. So in that way, it's really not a whole lot different. Like you really had to be like a major star to sort of see record company money. Like you could make more money touring or with
Mm-hmm.
merchandise or whatever else. So in that way too, like yeah, with the streaming services, not great, but I would caution people about getting nostalgic about the good old days because they weren't so great those days.
Were there any famous musicians or singers that you worked with that when you first worked with them you felt like really intimidated or sort of starstruck by?
Certainly. I mean, starstruck, that doesn't happen to me much anymore because I've just sort of
Mm-hmm.
like got to know that people are kind of people, and whether they
Mm-hmm.
happen to be famous or not, they're still people, and they put on their trousers one leg at a time and all that kind of stuff. But that said, you know, um, when I was working with Sam Moore, he did a duet on one of his records with this guy from England named Sting.
Mm-hmm.
And Sting came to go sit in with us. We worked with him 3 or 4 times, I think, And the high school talent show I told you about when I first played, one of the very first songs I played in that set was, Message in a Bottle and Roxanne. So to then sort of meet him and play Message in a Bottle on stage with him
Mm-hmm.
at the Obama inauguration was like this kind of, it was completely surreal. Like there's no way to sort of justify what was happening 27 years later to my high school brain. There was no way. But I had enough sort of professional, I don't know, wherewithal to know that I still had to hit my marks. I still had a job to do. So like, even though, yeah, this is Sting and he's a childhood hero of mine, I also have to play the right notes and conduct the band and everything else. So I kept my head on straight. But when people like that come in the room, you kind of, some people like that have these giant personalities, when standing next for Sam, for instance. So Sam is a true first tenor. Like, Sam and Dave were revered and idolized by anybody who's a royalty of rock and roll. So standing next to Sam, I have met Bono, The Edge, Springsteen, Robert Plant, Paul Rogers, Elvis Costello, Sting. Like they all come at him with no ego at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's just, he's got this amazing instrument. They all love him. And Sam would go, "Oh, this is my music director." And I'd go like, "Yeah, how you doing?" But we see these personalities, when you see Robert Plant come into a room, you're like, "Wow, that's that's Robert Plant," And then you just shake his hand and go, "Nice to meet you. Thank you." But you do a little internal kind of dance, like, "Whoa, that's Robert Plant." Wow.
Do you release any solos? Do you do like solo stuff?
Yeah. Like I said, I have I have 4 CDs sort of out over the last 25 years or so.
Okay.
But the new thing is I've been signed as an artist, an artist named Funkboy. That's the name of the artist, to Color Red Music, which is run by Eddie Roberts from the New Master Sounds.
Okay.
They're based in Denver, but they're international, so like, yeah, I'm an artist now for the first time, a signed artist for the first time in my life, which is kind of surreal and beautiful at the same time, something good that came out of quarantine, really, because, I had the time and the motivation to create all this original music, and they said, we'll have that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Do you play every day?
Yeah, I play something every day. Yeah, I mean, lately, a lot of my practice time historically has been learning material for whatever's coming up. If you're trying to sub on a Broadway show, you got to memorize the whole show or whatever it is, or learn all the stuff for the bar mitzvah this weekend or whatever that is. And during quarantine, I haven't had to do much of that. So what I decided to work on, because I had the time and the energy, was I started playing the upright bass with a bow. which is called arco playing, which I wasn't raised doing because I came through no music education. So, it's like trying to learn how to play guitar with a fly swatter. It's the most uncomfortable, unnatural sort of thing if you're, growing up playing Fender bass with your fingers. So I've been doing that and also simultaneously reading through mostly jazz scores, like solo transcriptions and that kind of thing. So it's a combination of sort of reading and playing with the bow that I've been working on an hour a day, every day for a year. And I'm really not much better at it, I have to say, after a year. But every Broadway book, not every Broadway, but many Broadway books will have like one song that's sort of is played with a bow. And I'm like, all right, you have to kind of have that quiver in your arrow in your quiver to make sure that you can cover that sort of thing when it does come up. So that was sort of my least spectacular parlor trick, I think. So I try to shore that up a bit this year, and I'm in better shape than I was, but I'm still no classical player by any stretch at all.
And what are your thoughts about like a lot of public schools in this country are cutting funds and are not. Many of them don't even offer music education. What do you feel your thoughts of the importance of offering that to students?
Well, yeah, I think that's a tremendous tragedy and a disservice. That said, as I mentioned before, I had no music education growing up, so I had to get it on my own. So in a way, that can kind of motivate you to go get something. But in another way, we know now, and we've known for decades and decades, that learning to play music wires up different pathways in your brain. It's good for mathematics. It's good for science. It's good for, I can't tell you how many people I know who are like trained doctors, licensed medical professionals who also are like amazing violinists. This is sort of the similar kind of, you use some similar brain structures. So by not having arts education, they're just doing a huge disservice to people, in my opinion, But that said, life finds a way. So we wouldn't necessarily have hip hop music like we do today had not the New York City schools cut music programming in the 70s. So kids had to figure out how to make their own music with turntables and talking over records. That was kind of a direct thing from the city going bankrupt in the 70s. That's sort of like it created an entire genre. So things can come out of it that are positive, but that's the tough way to get to that. You know what I mean? Like it would be much easier if everybody knew a little something about music and arts.
And how long you lived in New York City for?
Oh, a long time. I lived here for a second in the 80s for about a year and a half, from about 86. So my first job out of college was at Epic Records when I lived in New York. And then I moved to LA with that job, same job. And then I knocked around for a minute and then went back to music school in Boston. So when I graduated from Berkeley in Boston, I moved to New York in 92. And I moved to an apartment in Williamsburg that I had for 25 years, because back then Williamsburg was a good place to go to dump a body, So the housing was affordable, or shall we say. And then, about 4 years ago or something, they finally sold the building. So I was like, all right, I never had a lease. I only had a handshake with the people downstairs, So it was time to find something else. So I managed to purchase a co-op in Forest Hills, saving up all my pennies from all the wedding gigs and whatever.
Do you have like a large community of like friends here in the city? That are musicians?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I mean, I've been running in the same circles up and down Bleecker Street, for going on 30 years now. So you see some of the same people. What was the old saying, like, be nice to everybody, because, if you're on your way up, be nice to people, because you're going to see them again on your way back down. And I find that's certainly true. I remember seeing a buddy of mine was playing, he was touring with Enrique Iglesias. It's like this giant Latin pop star, probably as big as they come, so he was doing like, stadium tours. And the next time I saw him, he was back on Bleecker Street playing a $50 gig. And I was like, that told me something. I'm like, that's what you need to do. Like, play for the love of the sport. After your giant rock star tour, you're going to be right back here on Bleecker Street. So you might as well, like it, because you're not going to be ever priced out of a market. I don't think, certainly not if you like creating music and meeting people and, collaborating with your peers.
And do you think you would ever do like a follow-up book at some point?
I've thought about it. I only have kind of a working title, which would be, because this one's called "Am I Famous Yet?" The next one would be "Still Not Famous, but I'm not quite out of road stories yet." And I've even thought about possibly doing I've been serializing the chapters of my book, and they are available as a YouTube series and also as a podcast. And I was thinking I could do an auxiliary, bonus podcast episode each week would be like the stories of the week that would tell, like, you're not going to believe what happened at the gig last Friday kind of thing. But again, I'm just toying with the idea. We'll see what happens. I don't know yet.
So are there any upcoming projects that you're working on, or anything that's coming up later this year?
I'm just so excited to be getting back to work. I can't tell you, as much as I enjoyed collecting an unemployment check, that's not for me. I like to be going. I have a lot of work booked. Like I said, most of it's private party work. I have trips coming up to, I got a gig in Vail. I've got a gig in Napa. I've got a gig in Tuscany. I've got some concert. I'm playing the first classic soul concert is going to be like with Jay and the Americans. We're going to play up in Buffalo in mid and early August. So that's going to be like the first concert sort of back. And then I'm waiting to hear. I have a couple of things I'm waiting to hear, but I don't want to say anything yet because, you never know until contracts are signed, that kind of thing. So I'm sure I'll be employed doing something, which is fine with me. I kind of don't care. I'm almost as happy playing, a jam session at a dive bar as I am doing a rock concert. They're kind of equally fun to me,
Since you've been living in New York City for a while, I guess you've seen a lot of venues come and go, and do you think now post, things will get normal now post COVID? Do you think that hopefully there'll be more venues opening up, like independent venues opening up?
I certainly hope so. Yeah. A lot of what has happened, is started kind of about 3 or 4 mayors ago. Like Manhattan got to be so expensive, and they also started to criminalize noise. So under Giuliani, I don't know if you heard of him. He was he criminalized sound. So there was a point in time there where the cops had to show up anytime there was any noise complaint, and there's always a crank on every block who will complain. So it got to be really tough on a lot of venues. And then the Manhattan real estate got to be so expensive that it was just really hard for a lot of live music venues to survive. So some things did start to move to Brooklyn. There's some really cool venues in Williamsburg now. I'm interested at the moment to see who survives the pandemic, because there are other things going on with, rent stabilization and forgiveness and all that kind of stuff. So I'll be interested to see who can sort of get back on their feet. But I again, I'm not precious about it. I'm happy to set up and play just about anywhere you want. Anybody will hire me. It's like, I'll do it. I'll play there in the corner by the, move the pool table over and, set up and play a show. We're happy to do it.
When you're working on your book, were there any unusual stories, or things that that sort of I don't know, that you hadn't thought about for years,
Yeah. The way that I was putting the book together is sort of my memory is good, but it's also disjointed in a way. It's not linear. So what happens with me, and the reason why I started telling these stories is because something will happen. It will remind me of something. It'll open a door, and I have a whole story that goes with that thing. So as I was collecting stories for the book, it sort of became a series of unlocking these little doors. It's oh yeah, I remember that, and having these sort of stories that kind of relate, because there are certain things, like you said, there's a whole story about us having to go in through the kitchen, the whole chapter about various catering halls that treat us as second-class citizens. So those would get grouped together as kind of a lump of things. And there's a whole set of stories about, there's one chapter called Gigs I Didn't Get and Why. And it's a whole list of failed auditions and missed connections and double bookings that, had to be canceled and things like that. So those kind of got grouped together. And I know there are other things. And when I get reminded of them, I try to make a note somewhere to or a future story idea. I could, go into this sort of thing. But it's so funny the way things bubble up. They bubble up in a kind of random way with me for some reason.
And Ivan, what kind of advice would you give to a young budding musician who wants to, become musician full time, not to worry about, doing a day job on the side?
Right. Well, I go back to what I said earlier. Like, if you can do anything else, do that, because it's just endless heartache on one level. But on another level, like what happened to me, and it happens to a lot of people too, is I had a full-time day job working for a record company. I had a corporate Amex card. I had the whole thing. I was a salaried employee, and I just hit the wall. I'm like, this is not for me. And it was kind of a drag, because I realized there's really nothing else I want to do. Like, I couldn't see myself really doing anything else that wouldn't have just felt like drudgery. So once you've hit that wall, you're like, all right, if I'm going to do this, I now need to really make sure, one needs to make sure you have your skill sets together. You have to be competent on your instrument. You've got to be educated about, at least the genres of music that you're ready to specialize in. And I would recommend people to branch out as much as possible, because it allows you to have different opportunities in different genres and different fields. If you can also play jazz and rock and blues and country and Broadway and classical and whatever else you can bring to your fold and your skill set, the more employable you are. I know people talk about reading music and do you really need to know how to read music to be a professional musician? No, you don't. But if you can read, you have more opportunities available to you. And you also have a better avenue to sort of bring in information more quickly. If somebody puts a chart in front of you, you can sit down. If you have a room full of readers, you can make a performance like in 10 minutes rather than, everybody having to go home and learn things, and memorize them, or whatever their process might be. So, you have to, be really sure this is what you want. And then if it is, then you have to really, spend the time and the energy you don't have to go to school necessarily, but you got to study somehow. Even if it's privately, you really have to get your stuff together so that you'll have the goods, because once you have all that, then you have to be lucky. Like, an opportunity has to come your way. So when an opportunity comes your way, if you have what it takes to fulfill the job, you'll be able to take advantage of that opportunity. If you don't, that opportunity is going to pass you by. And those are kind of few and far between, and I've heard people also say, like, the harder they work, the luckier they get, meaning they have more acumen, and they're out there doing it more. So then more of these bizarre opportunities might come your way. So yeah, if you're going to go for it, you have to really go for it. You can't just sort of, hope for American Idol to call and then you're just going to be famous after 3 minutes on TV. It seldom works that way. Not never, seldom,
Do you ever like in the middle of the night, or do you ever have any sort of dreams that are music related, like you're performing live or like something weird happens?
Constantly. Yeah. It's like, going to school and realizing you forgot to wear clothes, or your dog ate your homework, whatever. Yeah. I have a lot of stress dreams all the time, especially if I have a lot of material coming up, like, for instance, like restarting these wedding gigs in the last couple of weeks after doing nothing for 15 months, going from that to going to a gig where I'm responsible for like 75 songs. That's anywhere from Sinatra to Bruno Mars and everything in between. And then they also have me conducting the band. So I have to know my parts. I have to know their parts. I have to be able to cue them in and out, sort of make this performance happen. And getting restarted after that length of time, these are skills that I've developed over years of doing it. But getting that pump reprimed and restarted, that was, oh man, that did not feel good. That first weekend really hurt, but I think I'm getting back on the horse slowly.
Are there any particular genres of music that you find pretty challenging to play?
Yeah, all of
Over
them,
others?
every single
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Again, my aspirations were to be like this heavy fusion rock jazz cat, and again, in retrospect, none of that happened, not at all. So, I've sort of found a home in the classic soul R&B world and classic rock kind of world. So that's the stuff that I just have done more stuff and I enjoy more. I certainly like playing jazz gigs and I like playing fusion gigs, if they kind of fit my skill set. If it's a lot of sort of like heavy reading and playing tutti passages with the 16th notes with the keyboard player, like some of those things feel daunting to me. And I've certainly not passed on those gigs, but been happy when they called somebody else to do some of those. But if it's something that I feel like I could do with sort of a moderate amount of prep work, I'm all for the challenge and all for the, mind expanding and creative listening that has to go into it. I'm pretty sure that if somebody called me for a classical gig, I'd have to say no, because I just know I'm not qualified for it, Certainly, what else? Yeah, if it's a heavy fusion thing or a heavy classical thing, like, I have to really know what I'm getting into before I'm going to say, yeah, I'll do it, just out of self-preservation.
I like the different like video testimonies you have on your website, like that hilarious story with Bowser, the Hershey Park.
Hershey Park happy.
Yeah, Hershey Park happy.
That's right. Yeah, I remain Hershey happy to this day. He's told that story to like, he does that show at Hershey Park like every year. He's been doing it for 20-something years. And he's told it to the crew of that park. He told that story over and over again. And I probably did one of the very first of those shows with him, which is when that incident happened. And then I didn't do another one until maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And we were backstage and I think Bowser pointed at me. He's like, that's the guy. And they're all like, what? You're not Hershey happy? Like they'd all heard the story. My reputation preceded me. I'm like, yeah, that's me. I'm not Hershey happy. Sorry, man.
Hello. Thanks for listening to the Erratic Dispatches podcast. We'll be back shortly after a brief break. Thanks again for tuning in to this latest episode of the Erratic Dispatches podcast, featuring an interview with Ivan Funkboy Bodley, author of Am I Famous Yet? Memoir of a Working Class Rock Star. For this podcast episode, I pasted a link in which you could check out Ivan's official website, and please be sure to purchase a copy of his memoir and also check out his YouTube channel, which includes really cool videos of his music, and also check out different video testimonials from a lot of the singers and bands that he's worked with over the years. So definitely support Ivan in any way with his music and with his book. All right. Thanks again for listening. I will be back soon with a new episode. Take care. Bye-bye.